Hello, everybody. Welcome. Thank you all for coming today. It's a great afternoon to be here in Franklin. My name is Dana Hanson. I am Congressman Auchincloss's district director, and we are so grateful that you are spending your time here engaging in the democratic process. Congressman Auchincloss is really looking forward to taking your questions today. The format of our event is he will give a brief congressional update at the beginning of our time together, and then we will have an opportunity for questions and answers. And during that time, we have, if you have been to our town halls before, you're familiar with the fact that we have 2 microphones. In the past, we've had people like line up at the microphones, but now what we do is we pull lottery tickets. So behind us, we will pull up different tickets, and at the top right-hand corner of your ticket are numbers, and so you'll see those numbers, and then you can just come on up and show either Kian or Michael, our staffers, your ticket, and then you can ask your question. As many of you know, because we hear from our constituents all the time, there are lots of different ways to engage with our office. You can call us, you can email us, you can talk to our staff one-on-one at these sorts of events. So there are lots of different ways to sort of hear about the congressman and what his ideas are and where he is on certain issues. And this is a unique opportunity for you to ask an unscripted question and have an unscripted answer. We do ask, though, that you ask a question. This is intentionally not called a town hall. What we like to do is to have people, rather than having long prologues to their question, just ask the question, because Congressman Auchincloss, I think we can all agree he's really well versed on a lot of different issues, and if he needs extra context for your question, he will be sure to ask. So that's one thing. Also, because we have a lot of folks here today and we like to try to get through as many people's questions as possible, if your question has been asked 1, 2, 3 times, we will move on to new topics. That's not to say that we can't sort of, address a topic from different angles, but sometimes we find a lot of the questions get asked in a repetitive manner, and then that can be a little bit frustrating for people who came to hear a wide breadth of issues that are going on. So as a courtesy to all of our neighbors and everybody who decided to come out today, it would be wonderful if we can, once a topic has sort of gone the distance, then we can move on to a new one. Another thing is that a lot of times people want to let the congressman know if they either agree with something that he has said or if they agree with a question that somebody has said. But the applause that happens when questions or answers happen, it can kind of slow down the flow of the event, because then we're like, shh, shh, shh. So what we're going to try to do today is, if you are in agreement with either an answer or a question, American Sign Language, this is to show applause and agreement. So this is a great, really visceral way to show that you are in agreement, and the congressman can see everybody doing that from up here. So it is effective for that. Last thing that I will note is the emergency exits. We have them here and in the back, and then as you came in earlier, you saw that the restrooms are out to the left-hand side as you exit the auditorium at this point. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce Congressman Auchincloss.
Good afternoon, Franklin. Thank you for being here, and especially for those of you who have chosen me over the beginning of what we hope is going to be a winning New England Patriots season. So you can also, of course, record it. I want to thank our state representative, Jeff Roy, for being here. Jeff, where you at? There you go. Thank you for being here, Jeff. Thank you as well to, let's do the sign language, yeah. Thank you as well to our school committee chair, Dave Callahan, and to our school committee member, Ruth Ann O'Sullivan, as well. I appreciate our elected officials being in attendance. And can everybody hear me if I'm talking like this? Is it fair? Okay, good. So there is an enormous amount happening. There's no shortage of current events, no shortage of righteous concern, and I hope we address many of these near and present issues this afternoon. Let me address what I think is a even more fundamental issue, which is we are facing right now governance of the trifecta in Washington, Republicans in control of the White House and, of course, the Senate and the House, and that has deprived my party of a tremendous amount of power to protect the Constitution and to safeguard the economy. The most critical thing that I can do is to help Democrats fashion a governing majority in this country over the next 2 to 4 years. Because ultimately, if we can't win, we can't govern, we can't deliver. But in order to effectively earn voters' trust, we need to tell Americans what we are for, not just who we are against. It's been 10 years now of Donald Trump. Americans are eminently clear that Democrats don't like him very much. His approval ratings are the same today as they were a decade ago. So we need a better and a different argument. We need bolder and bigger ideas. And I would put forward that it's a three-part argument to the American people. First of all, Democrats need to be the party of affordable home ownership, of lower health care premiums, of affordable utilities. Those three sectors, buying a home, especially if you're a millennial or you're Gen Z, paying your health care premiums, which are up to $20,000 for a family of 4, paying your electrical bill, it's suffocating the middle class here in Massachusetts and beyond. The average middle class family is going to be spending between 40 to 60% of their take-home pay just on those three things alone. And for the next generation, the inability in particular to buy and to afford a home is preventing them from getting that first foot on the ladder and demoralizing our next generation of entrepreneurs and workers. Democrats need to be able to cut regulations that are holding back affordability. For example, zoning or land use restrictions that make it too hard to build duplexes and missing middle housing. We need to be keen on adopting technology that can make it faster, better, cheaper to build new energy sources like nuclear power or geothermal. And we have to be willing to take on the entrenched special interests that keep prices high. For example, the pharmacy benefit managers owned by the health insurance corporations that are the middlemen of drug pricing and take hundreds of billions of dollars every year out of the drug pricing supply chain in a way that keeps your premiums and out-of-pocket costs high. I'm working on legislation across all three fronts, and will continue to push the Democratic Party to be the party of affordability in home ownership, in utilities, in healthcare. Second, Democrats need to reclaim issues that the opposition used to campaign on and has since abandoned. Old-fashioned ideas like law and order, national security, balanced budgets, respect for faith, family, and the flag. Whether or not you think the Republican Party used to deliver on those issues, they certainly used to campaign on them. This president, with his demagoguery and his corruption, has no interest in any of those issues. A president who tries to steal an election, who floods our streets with ghost guns, is not the president of law and order. A president who rolls out the red carpet for Vladimir Putin before Vladimir Putin then strikes U.S. sites in Ukraine is not the president of national security. Democrats need to lay claim to these issues, not just in words, but in deed. And then finally, we have to be able to skate to where the puck is headed and to reframe some of the key issues facing our culture and society. In particular, the manner in which big tech corporations, particularly social media corporations, are exploiting American youth, attention fracking a generation, and holding themselves above accountability by the American public. Right now, our social media paradigm is governed by Mark Zuckerberg, who thinks that according to internal documentation, it's acceptable for chatbots to have, quote, sensual conversations with 12-year-olds on his platform. It's governed by Elon Musk, enough said. And it's governed by the Chinese Communist Party, which owns and controls TikTok the most important media and entertainment platform in the United States and arguably in the world. These are the individuals that are deciding what kinds of information the American public consumes, what is amplified, what is suppressed. They are not subject to any litigation or tort. They are not subject, frankly, to almost any laws at all. And I'm going to be leading the charge in Congress to once and for all hold these corporations, which have made trillions of dollars over the last decade and a half, accountable to the American public, and particularly to parents who do not want their children's brains programmed like pieces of software. One concept in particular, we know since the pandemic that American math and reading scores have cratered catastrophically. 12th graders are doing math at the worst level in 30 years, and roughly 25 million out of the 50 million American public school students are behind on either reading or mathematics. This is a moral abomination, and one of the ways that I know that we can rectify it is by surging one-on-one tutoring to every student who's behind grade level on either math or reading. We know one-on-one tutoring can be highly effective. It's not the only intervention that works, but it's very effective and and is complementary, I should say, to classroom instruction. And we should make these social media corporations pay for every dime of it. They have made trillions since the pandemic, keeping kids glued to their screens. They should pay some of it back, helping our children now thrive in the economy of the 21st century. So on these three fronts, being a party of affordability, being a party that lays claim to law and order, to faith, family, and the flag, to national security, being a party that takes on the special interests of the tech corporations, I think Democrats can chart a path forward to being a governing party that can answer to Americans what we are for, not just who we are against. I'm looking forward now to your questions about current events and the issues of the day.
Four ticket numbers. No. Sorry about that, everybody. She's going to put 4 ticket numbers up on the screen. And so when you approach the microphones, you can, it's good to have sort of 2 deep on each microphone. So if you see that there are 3 on this side, even though you're sitting on this side, maybe go to the other side, because we can't really predict which side people are going to be sitting on when we pull the tickets. And you can show Kian and Michael your number, and so then they'll just sort of check that up against the numbers that are on the screen. And again, just a quick reminder about applause. We'll do the sign language. And we are planning on taking questions until possibly as late as 4:30. So we have time together here. So we're going to try to get through as many questions as we can. And hey, Katerina. Okay, she's up there. She's giving us the 1 second sign. Technology, it's a beautiful thing. But in this moment, we will take a look at our tickets. That way we are ready to roll. And actually, Katerina, why don't you just come out here and just shout out a couple of these numbers if we're not getting them up on the screen perfectly? Live excitement here. All right. Five, six, seven, eight. 5, 6, 7, 8. Please approach.
That's really easy. Okay.
5, 3, 3, 7. All right, we'll get started and we'll continue to troubleshoot up there. Apologies for the technical difficulties.
Okay, so thanks for taking questions and coming to Franklin. Parents today face an impossible task trying to keep their kids safe online. I know I spoke to the police here in Franklin. They get over 2 to 3 reports weekly. of children just being exploited online, and Jeff Roy's done a lot with legislation locally. What is Congress doing to relieve families of carrying this overwhelming burden? Because parents, I think, have a hard time balancing allowing their kids to connect with other children and keep them safe online. So I just was curious.
Absolutely. Yeah, the question was about what is Congress doing to empower parents as they are trying to, I'll paraphrase here, fight for family time against screen time. What we're seeing right now is the unintended consequences of a law passed in the 1990s. It was the Telecommunications Decency Act in the 1990s at the birth of the internet. And this bill did a lot of things, but most relevant to here, it did two things in particular. One, it basically immunized, it held harmless all social media platforms from litigation. So they can't be sued for the kind of things that a reporter can be sued for, libel, slander, other torts. And the second thing it did is it established the age of internet adulthood as 13 years old, but it had no enforceability mechanisms, none. And it used to be that when you tried to sign up for an account on Facebook, Facebook would actually proactively tell you that your age was exactly what would make you 13 years old on that day. So you can see the kind of good faith that you got from these tech companies. But there is no way to enforce this from the tech company's perspective. And so what does that mean? That means that we are tossing and have tossed, especially since the year 2010 to 2012, when smartphones preloaded with social media apps became ubiquitous. We have tossed an entire generation into the digital wilderness. We've allowed them to grow up online with no norms, regulations, accountability, oversight. We don't do that in the real world. It'd be astounding in the real world if you let kids drive anywhere they wanted at any age and engage in all kinds of in real life adult activities without any supervision. But that's what basically has happened over the last 15 years. I don't think it's been fair to our children. I think the mental health stats would support that. And Congress hasn't acted. But we're working to change that. We're working on legislation right now that would, one, raise the age of internet adulthood from 13 without being enforceable to 16 and enforceable with some very strong teeth that makes it, Zuckerberg's problem if underage users are accessing these accounts. The second thing we're doing is we're trying to reform that law that made it so that these companies are not liable for toxicity on their platforms. I don't think I have to convince this audience that social media can be a very toxic place. And the challenge is it's not a board level problem for these companies. They don't care. We're changing that so that, for example, if a platform is hosting non-consensual intimate privacy violations, so like deep fake pornography that is targeting young women, that is a board level problem for that company. They can be sued and they can be held liable for significant sums. Because once they know that money's at stake, you're going to see them change their user design behaviors very, very quickly. I'll add a third intervention that I think Congress needs to get behind, which I've written about recently, is we need to start thinking about the neurological effects of these platforms from first principles. Right now, a lot of our legislation and litigation and regulation in Congress and in Washington, it's all about antitrust law. So there was a court case a couple weeks ago that said that Google has to share its browser data with Bing. I mean, does that matter to you? Like, does that affect your life in any way, shape, or form? It's interesting, I guess, from an antitrust perspective, but it doesn't really change the kind of power that these tech companies have over daily life. What I think we have to start evaluating is what is the actual effect of dopamine release on young people with social media, online gambling, pornography being as ubiquitous as it is. Because we know that this is a dopamine response that is getting triggered repeatedly by using these apps. And actually, the medical science behind it is not a mystery. There's actually a lot of good research about this. We know that young people in particular have very sensitive dopamine release, neurological pathways, and more immature judgment. And the combination of those two things makes them very, very vulnerable to being exploited online. And just like we try to protect kids in the real world from that, we should try to protect them online. And this is not some kind of, Luddite anti-tech posture. I FaceTime with my kids all the time when I'm in Washington. Like, I use social media as a politician. It's here to stay, but we got to do it responsibly, and we shouldn't let these tech CEOs tell us what the future is going to be. We should tell them the kind of future we want, and they can help us deliver it.
Great, thanks, Congressman. Okay, so now we are getting the flywheel going on these tickets. So the way that this is going to work is our next two questioners are each going to, you will ask your question, then you will ask your question, and then the congressman will answer sort of in pairs. That sort of just keeps things flowing a little more easily. So please go ahead.
My name is Zach. Thanks, Jake, for coming on. Our country's $34 trillion in debt, and we're sending money to Israel overseas. AIPAC has had U.S. officials arrested, convicted of espionage, and the majority of people in our country, our congressmen, are taking money from AIPAC. A lot of people in my age group are starting to believe that our government is working on the behalf of a foreign government rather than its own, seeing our debt and the way we spend. Will you do anything to distance yourself from the country of Israel?
Thank you.
The United States has, oh yeah, that's right, we do too.
Hi, to continue that, I believe you've taken $444,000 from the 23-24 election cycle from AIPAC, while the majority of your constituents believe that the war in Gaza should end. I think 87 was the last poll, or 87% was the last poll I saw. How do you think that you're accurately representing your constituents with that big of a difference?
Yeah, my constituents can and should review my vote record and my public comments on the war between Israel and Hamas, where I've been clear for 2.5 years now that the contest or the choice being put as being either pro-Israel or pro-Palestine to me is a false choice. I am both. I believe that the events of October 7th and the atrocities committed by Hamas are unconscionable, and Israel has a right to defend itself. I believe that starvation and the restriction of humanitarian aid is unconscionable, and Israel needs to reverse course. It does have a responsibility as a country that has control over 90% of Gaza to ensure that the Palestinian people in Gaza, particularly the 1 million children in Gaza, do not suffer from malnutrition. And I've acted in accord with both of those beliefs, both with my voice and my vote. I agree that the country's debt is significant, $34 trillion. Happy to talk about that. The provision of military aid to Israel is not what's causing that debt, and in fact, it has been a military R&D partnership that has returned, I would argue, more for the Pentagon even than actually for the Israeli Defense Forces. Much of our ability on air defense in particular has come through partnership with the IDF. So I don't think that it's a debt driver, and I don't think it's I don't think that it's mislaid dollars, but certainly the United States has leverage over Israel, and this president should use it and has not. When he struck Iran, for example, I was one of the first members of Congress to implore him to use American strikes on Iran as leverage over Prime Minister Netanyahu, to say that, yes, the United States can help you make sure that Iran cannot deliver a nuclear weapon, which is in the interests of both Middle East and global security, but in exchange for what is going to be a political victory from Prime Minister Netanyahu, he needs to deliver a political endgame in Gaza, because a series of IDF tactical successes does not a strategic victory make. And I say that as somebody who saw what a forever war can look like in Afghanistan. The United States Marines, the United States Army won every single firefight in Afghanistan over the course of 20 years, and we did not win that war. And that's because there was not a political endgame attached to the military strategy. And Prime Minister Netanyahu has not architected a post-Hamas governance structure for Gaza that is Palestinian-led, that's Arab-financed, and this president needs to exert pressure on him to do so.
Yes, thank you. How do we put a check on the Supreme Court? There's been a lot of votes that didn't seem constitutional. Citizens United would be one of them. And how can we get control again of our destiny? It seems like they're running radical.
Hello, Congressman. Walter Callahan from Bellingham. I have to tell you, I'm very concerned and fearful for what is happening to this country right now. My question is, what are we going to do about these ICE agents that are running around basically incognito with masks on their face? I think it's time that Trump is told to stop building his private army. And what are you going to do about it, and as well as your colleagues in Congress? We can't wait until 2026. Thank you.
Yep. The questions, let's do the sign language. Questions basically were, the first one was about the Supreme Court and Citizens United in particular. So the Supreme Court, roughly speaking, looks to be divided along three fronts. There are the conservative justices. When I say conservative, I mean kind of the old school conservative that you have in your head. Then there's the liberal justices, and then there's like the MAGA justices. And so many of these decisions seem to be a question about whether the conservative justices are going to go with MAGA or with the liberal ones. And I have been so disappointed over the last several years to see that the conservative justices are not actually abiding by constitutionally conservative principles in their decisions. They're instead choosing party over what I think is their ideology. And I'll give you an example of that. About a year and a half ago, they ruled that a president basically has immunity for any action committed in a, quote, official capacity, which I don't even really know what that means. But that is not a conservative principle. The conservative tradition of jurisprudence would say actually that executives should have extreme scrutiny applied to them. It's very skeptical of executive power, and that it should be very tightly scoped to oversight and litigation. But Roberts and the rest of the kind of small c conservatives went with MAGA. So unfortunately, the Supreme Court, like the Republicans in Congress, is more and more a rubber stamp on the president. I do think that we're going to see the Supreme Court ultimately rule against the president's attempt to take from Congress the power of the purse. That might sound kind of boring, but it's actually fundamentally critical. If Congress loses the power of the purse, the ability to appropriate and to say how money is spent, we're not really a legislature anymore. We're kind of a steering committee. And I'm fairly confident this Supreme Court is actually going to side with Congress over the president on that critical issue. When it comes to their decision on Citizens United, I think there is a short-term and a long-term opportunity. The short-term opportunity is litigation that's going to come from Maine. So Maine right now has passed a law that would limit the amount of money that can be contributed to a super PAC. And that's kind of like a backdoor way of neutering Citizens United. That's a good law, and it's going to give the Supreme Court another bite at the apple, as it were, to basically limit the influence of big money in politics by saying that limits on contributions to super PACs are fair game. In the longer run, I think Democrats should just move forward with the legislative overturning of Citizens United. For the last decade, my party has been saying it's going to take an amendment to the Constitution. I think that's kind of weak tea at this point. I think we should just plow ahead on a legislative action and dare the Republicans to be the ones who want to disagree with us about getting big money out of politics. I think we can win that fight with the American public and move as aggressively on our priorities as this president is on his. ICE agents, yeah, so the ICE under this one big beautiful bill, which I voted against, got $75 billion in funding. This is deeply concerning. It's more money than I think the next 9 federal law enforcement agencies combined. Recent actions by ICE absolutely raise concerns about their professionalism and competence. I have checked in with the federal judge here in Massachusetts to make sure that all of her orders have been respected as it relates to immigration. The answer is, so far here in Massachusetts, at least as of a month ago, orders from judges have been respected by ICE, which is critically important. I have also been involved in times when I think that ICE agents have been acting extremely inappropriately. We saw that next door in Milford when a young man was taken out of his car on the way to a volleyball practice. In concert with other members of Congress, I visited him at the processing facility in Burlington, and ultimately he was released and has not been since remanded again. I'm also a co-sponsor of bipartisan legislation that would enact more accountability on ICE agents, much more accountability on ICE agents, including prohibition on them wearing masks or using unmarked vehicles, which is totally outside the bounds of how Americans should expect law enforcement to operate. And if this president tries to deploy the National Guard here in Massachusetts without the express written consent and request of Governor Maura Healey, you know, I think we need mass resistance to that. Greater Boston does not quarter the King's troops 250 years ago. We're not going to quarter the president's troops either.
Okay, next questions.
Congressman Auchincloss, thank you for being here. My name is Scott Nolan. I've been with the Executive Office of Health and Human Services here in Massachusetts for the last 31 years, in the field of human services for the last 43. And one of my biggest concerns right now with the big bill, I refrain from calling it beautiful, is currently with the Medicaid waiver funding. One of my biggest concerns is right now, certainly for all of our agencies, DDS, DMH, DCF, all of our communities that are funded, whether it be for our residents within nursing facilities, our veterans, people who receive services under DMH, these Medicaid waivers are essential to services that fund all these marginalized populations. My career started off working in state institutions in Connecticut. I have devoted currently I work in state licensure and certification. I go into nursing homes, I do active treatment reviews. I'm very, very concerned with how these funds could be appropriated, and even in terms of our vets, in terms of case management supports, these funds are essential to community services. And one of the things that I think we saw early on with the whole DOJ thing is how, even in federal services, how these indiscriminate decisions were made about how cutting services in the federal workforce, the impact on how this could be serving people just to get services, it is absolutely essential. I think about this all the time, and I just wonder what's being done to begin to look at this and how can these services be continued. Thank you.
Aside from voting and supporting organizations we care about whose funding has either been threatened or cut, what practical things can we do to oppose what's going on in Washington?
All right, so two questions. The first was about cuts to Medicaid. A quick sort of level set. As part of this, of the legislation passed in Washington last month, the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, there were very significant cuts to Medicaid, costing Massachusetts somewhere between $2 to $3 billion a year for mass Medicaid funding. And then number two is a significant amount of more paperwork and bureaucracy, so-called work requirements. These work requirements are not really work requirements. They've been tried in Georgia and Arkansas. What they are persistent, and I would argue invasive, requests for people to document that they do in fact suffer from a disability or that they are in fact caring for a family member with a disability. It does not increase labor force participation amongst the Medicaid community, which is actually reasonably high here in Massachusetts. What it does do is it kicks people off Medicaid rolls. And it projected to be several 100,000 here in Massachusetts would get kicked off of Medicaid. That's not just a problem for those individuals and their families. That's a problem for all of us, for the very simple reason that when someone who doesn't have health insurance gets sick, they still go get medical care. They just go to the emergency room. And going to an emergency room is like, you know, it's like going on a space shuttle. Just everything costs 10 times more that happens afterwards. And so that is called uncompensated care. And that uncompensated care is paid for by all of us through higher health insurance premiums, because the hospitals take that uncompensated care and they throw it on to Medicare, or they throw it on to Medicaid, or they throw it on to the health insurance companies that provide health insurance through your employer. And we all end up subsidizing it. So it's just a very non-cost-effective way of trying to do healthcare reform. Here in Massachusetts, Mass Health is already trying to get ahead of this. I'm not going to speak to all the state level policy changes that they're going to have to make. But one thing I can say is, in general, I think Democrats should lean into Medicaid. Republicans are trying to make it seem as though Medicaid is unpopular. They're daring the American public to not get mad if they're going to cut Medicaid. Actually, if you look at the most cost-effective, leanest administration of healthcare here in Massachusetts, it's Mass Health. It's our Medicaid. Very, very thin admin layer costs. There's no for-profit incentives like you see with United Health Group or Cigna. And they're doing a pretty darn good job on behavioral care, on substance use interventions, on primary care. I'm not going to go into all the details, but I think that my party should actually lean into Medicaid and provide a public option through Medicaid that allows individuals to start to buy into Medicaid if you're sick of having 15 to 20% premium increases every single year. You could start maybe with just the over 50 population for long-term services and supports, but we can get more and more ambitious. And this is a political fight that I think ultimately is, we're on the right side of history for. And then the gentleman asked, what's something actionable besides voting that we can do? So many things. Let me just offer one. Get involved in local news and local politics. 50% of your tax dollars, all of your kids' education is getting done at the local level, and yet turnout in local elections is less than 20% in most municipalities, and local news has collapsed. And what has filled the void when local news collapses is Facebook and social media. And whereas local news used to be a mirror for a community and a way for a community to talk to one another and build up trust, social media is the exact opposite. It amplifies the 7 deadly sins on all of our worst impulses. And we're starting to see green shoots across the country of local news organizations figuring out different models for how to deliver news in a digital age, how to bring people together in real life for productive conversations. And I would just encourage everybody to really lean into one of the genius insights of our founders, which was federalism. Yes, we have to fight back against what's happening in Washington, but I would argue our strongest bulwark right now is states and cities.
Perfect. So to continue on to that, my question is about the divisiveness within our country. What can we do as citizens? What else can we do in addition to what you just said? What can you do specifically to try to help generate more compromise? You know, we don't see anybody vote across party lines. It seems like gerrymandering has resulted in a lot of safe seats. What can we try to do to try to get away from the fringes and back more towards a compromise? To your point, Federalist Papers, thinking the founding of our country, compromises seem to result in much better decisions and actions across our country than one party dominating the other.
Thank you, Congressman. So as we are here today, Israel is raining bombs on a starving population, blowing up high-rises, using white phosphorus, and ethnically cleansing Palestinians in Gaza. Leading international genocide scholars, including the International Association of Genocide Scholars, the foremost human rights groups like Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, and B'Tselem in Israel, have concluded Israel is committing genocide. What's going on there is not only immoral, but in fact, since the US has given Israel $30 billion worth of weapons in the last 2 years, this means that given there's a genocide there, the US is in violation of the Genocide Convention, in violation of our obligations under the Genocide Convention. So one step towards stopping these atrocities is to vote to co-sponsor the Block the Bombs Act, which was submitted by Delia Ramirez. Currently, there are over 40 signatories to that bill, and we are asking you, will you please co-sponsor the Block the Bombs Act to take a step towards the U.S. not being in violation of our obligations under the Genocide Convention? Thank you.
we so we disagree on the verbiage, but I do think we agree on the moral imperative to end suffering wherever it exists. And I've been strong on this issue, not just in Gaza, and my numerous efforts and initiatives to surge humanitarian aid, expanding the number of distribution sites from 4 back up to over 400, for example, and calorie count going into Gaza has significantly increased over the last several months because of that kind of pressure from Congress and international. But I've also been strong on the slavery in Xinjiang province in China, the anti-Muslim pogroms in India, the declared genocide in Sudan, being funded by the United Arab Emirates. And I'll continue to call out unethical violence or violence outside the bounds of the law of armed conflict wherever it exists, including being a critic of Prime Minister Netanyahu and his hard-right cabinet, where I think they're operating outside the bounds. And I have and will continue to do that, while also upholding Israel's right to defend itself and recognizing that the U.S.-Israel alliance does make the Middle East more secure. And yes, it does make the Middle East more secure, and it allows the United States to pull itself back from continued boots-on-the-ground engagement in that region and instead focus on our near-peer pacing adversary for the 21st century, which is the Chinese Communist Party in the Indo-Pacific. We need allies in Europe, we need them in the Middle East, we need them in Africa, we need them in the Indo-Pacific, and we should have strong economic and military ties with democracies across the globe. On the question of top 2 and divisiveness, or I should say on the question of divisiveness, let's not have shouting out, please. The question.
Okay. Thank you.
So on
we want to have this forum, and we just need to sort of have just general ground rules for how this is going to continue. So we're going to continue with the Q&A. Congressman, can you please answer the second question?
On the question of divisiveness, I'm going to let you all in on maybe it's something that will surprise you, maybe not, I don't know. But I work with 434 other members of Congress. Obviously, about half of them are Republicans. And, the Republicans, 80% of them, you could go out to dinner with them and with their spouse, totally genuine, normal, thoughtful people. The problem in Washington is not somehow that every single member of Congress has lost their mind. The problem is people are afraid. The Republican members of Congress are absolutely terrified of their base. Terrified. I mean, not just politically, physically afraid of their base. And that is because, as you said, sir, with the gerrymandered districts and the partisan primaries, of 435 members of Congress, fewer than 25 actually have a competitive election in November. So that means people's primaries are what decides if they come back to Congress or not. That's like a 15 to 20% turnout affair. The most ideologically intense voters show up. By the way, this is true in Massachusetts too, okay? We have a partisan primary system here in Massachusetts. And that's centrifugal. It pulls the parties to their flanks. The good news is that's actually eminently solvable. This is not written in the Constitution. This was only a relatively new affair since the 1960s that we've had this. Massachusetts is likely on the ballot in 2026, next year, to have a referendum on changing from a partisan primary system to a top 2 system that would end that pull to the flanks phenomenon. I'm strongly in support of that initiative. I would encourage people to get involved. It's a way to help heal our democracy at the state level. Now, we need other states to do it. And something tells me some of the biggest MAGA bastions will be the last ones to do it. But I think we can help heal our politics through electoral reform at the state level for sure and make it less divisive.
Hey, Congressman, thank you for your time. Thanks for coming. So one of the things that's great about our country is the right to free speech, right? I completely disagree with this gentleman had to say, but he has the right as an American.
at what point does Congress, do they have to, shouldn't they be held to a higher standard as members of Congress? I don't, at what, you didn't vote to censure in 23 Congresswoman Tlaib. Is there a certain line that would cause you to censure anyone? Can they say anything they want as lawmakers? And secondly, what would be the rationale for having the right as members of Congress to trade on inside information? I'm just curious I can come up with many reasons why they shouldn't be allowed. What would be the one argument that you would be allowed to trade on inside information? So, because it seems like it would take 10 minutes and that would go away, but I'm just curious what any member of Congress would vote on to why they would choose to have that and allow that to continue. Sure. Thank you.
Yes, Congressman, thank you for coming out today. I don't think I've heard this yet. So I think Wednesday, Charles Kirk was assassinated. And there has been, in the event, a lot, what I would consider a lot of divisiveness on how we regard Mr. Kirk and who is to blame. You know, was this young man a crazy liberal, or was he this or that? But the thing that concerns me the most, and the thing that scares me the most, is that a teacher in Framingham said something on her own social media post. To the best of my knowledge, she said she was happy that he was dead. She didn't say she wanted him dead. She simply said, he's happy. And she got fired. And I am wondering, I know if you work for a private corporation, you really don't have free speech. But when you work for a government entity, the First Amendment, you're supposed to be under the protections of the First Amendment. So how did this teacher get fired? And it's happening all over the country. And I see it as fear and intimidation.
So, sir, to your question about free speech and should members of Congress be held to a higher standard, members of Congress, when it comes to their speech, should be held to the standard that their voters decide is the standard that they want. That is why free and fair elections are so critical. There's 800,000 members of a congressional district. Those Americans should have free and fair elections. They should have absolute transparency into a member of Congress's conduct and speech, and ultimately they should be the ones to decide if they want to send somebody back. I think Marjorie Taylor Greene says a litany of ridiculous things.
I agree.
She's allowed to say them, and her voters are allowed to decide if that's the kind of style of representation that they want, similar to how the Massachusetts Fourth can decide. Where I would vote in general for a censure, which is an action of Congress as a body, would not be so much on someone's speech. It would really be scoped to at least two things. One would be corruption, so direct use of the office for personal profit, and then the other would be direct incitement to violence. And in all the examples that you're raising, neither of those were checked. There were people who saying things that I really disagreed with, but they're allowed to say those things. In terms of the trading on insider information, you know, I'm a co-sponsor of legislation that would ban members of Congress and the executive branch from trading equities or bonds. I myself do not trade equity or debt. Why hasn't that been passed yet? You'd have to ask Speaker Mike Johnson. There's a lot of legislation that hasn't been passed that I can tell you has 350 plus votes in the House. And, you know, he decides what comes to the floor. This one has bipartisan co-sponsorship, and he's keeping it blocked. Just like he's keeping blocked reform for drug pricing legislation on behalf of the health insurance companies, or why he's not going to bring up my legislation about the social media corporations, despite that'll be bipartisan. So we unfortunately see that this speaker is very beholden not just to the president, but to a lot of inside interests. Regarding censure of speech, I don't know the details of this Framingham post. It's not in my district. I'm not going to speak to that individual instance, but what I will say is both public and private employers are allowed to review someone's public record as they make a hiring decision. That is fair game, to see whether somebody is upholding the standards of that office or upholding the standards of that function and job, particularly one that's being funded by taxpayers and that is involved in the education of children. So on the face of it, I think making, that review is legal. I don't know about the specific instance, though.
Thank you.
Yes, hello. The September 30 deadline is coming up related to the continuing resolution. The last time Congress seemed to be divided on the Democratic side in terms of not allowing the resolution to continue or to do so, and it eventually continued. What is the stance today, and how do you use that moment as political leverage?
Sarah Larson, Rentham, thanks for being here. My question is relative to your co-sponsorship for the Metastatic Breast Cancer Access to Care Act, which would eliminate the waiting periods for women and men with metastatic breast cancer. Right now, it's a 5-month waiting period for SSDI, and these are people that qualify, they've worked, they've qualified, and then it's a 24-month for Medicare. And so people are dying, quite frankly, while they're waiting for something that they qualify for. So we'd love your co-sponsorship.
I'll look closely at it, and I think there's an analogous bill for ALS, am I right?
Yes,
yes,
exactly.
Yeah, I'll look closely at both of those. I agree with the principle that you described. And then the gentleman was asking about funding. So the federal government's funding runs out on September 30th. Our fiscal year runs from September 30th to September 30th. And as you all know, it's Republicans in charge of the House and Senate, so they're the ones who are driving this right now. The bills that are coming forward in the House are not acceptable bills to me. They're partisan bills. They are drastically cutting, for example, healthcare and basic research. They are not putting any accountability on ICE, despite, as we talked about earlier, the $75 billion that was funded towards ICE. And they're not reversing the biggest tax hike in American history, which is the president's unilateral tariffs that he's put in place over the last 6 months. This president has presided over the biggest tax hike in American history and the biggest health care cut in American history. And if the Republicans want to deal with Democrats, a really good place to start would be to reverse both those things, at least move in that direction of reversing both those things, because they're not popular with the American people. And we'll see whether we can get bipartisan deals done or whether we're heading towards a shutdown. A shutdown is complicated. I'll be very transparent with you all about how I'm thinking about it, because it's not simple. On one hand, funding this government presents its own set of challenges, because he could impound funds after the fact, he could misappropriate the funds, or we could be funding priorities that we don't agree with. On the other hand, heading into a shutdown is challenging, yes, because of the shutdown, which is not good for the economy, but actually even more so because of the reopening. The way that the federal government reopens after a shutdown is resolved, the president, and specifically the Office of Management and Budget, which is like kind of the president's CFO, has tremendous authority over which parts of the government to open and on what schedule. And so my concern is his OMB director, who is very, very hardline MAGA, keeps parts of the federal government in like a permanent coma after the closure. That basically the government shuts down and they just never reopen big chunks of it. And they use this as an excuse. So that's what I got to grapple with over the next few weeks, is how do we have leverage, and also how do we not give them a political gift of closing down parts of the government they don't want and being able to distract from what they don't want to talk about, which is, what they don't want to talk about is the fact that this economy is very soft right now. They took a very strong economy in January that had recovered from the pandemic with low unemployment, inflation was back down, it was healing, and they have just kicked it in the solar plexus over and over again. And they don't want to talk about that. They don't want to talk about unemployment for new college grads. They don't want to talk about unemployment going back up again for people in the trades. And so we want to keep the focus on that, not on a manufactured political crisis.
Hi, my name is Jeanette. I'm from Attleboro. My biggest issue is mental health in this country, and it's going downhill. I'm an adult child of a paranoid schizophrenic. My mother was allowed not to take her meds. She was allowed to board up her house. She was allowed to do things. And whenever my brother and I took her to court to force her, we were told by the judge, she's an adult. It's none of your business. Now, I'm getting aggravated because I'm seeing things in the news. That poor Ukrainian woman that was butchered. And I am a home nurse, so my main office is in Brockton, so I'm seeing it. When are we going to grow up and do something about the mental health issues in this country? Case in point, that young man that ran off on you.
I hear you.
We need to address it.
Thank you, Congressman, for taking my question today. As the gentleman, a few people before me pointed out, this last Wednesday was a horrifically violent day for our country, not just with the killing of Charlie Kirk, but also the horrific school shooting in Colorado that led, to my knowledge, 3 people in the hospital. And I think when we see issues like this, far too proportionally is the blame placed on members of our queer and trans community. And when I look comparatively from nation to nation across this world, the common denominator is not transgender people, but it's guns. So I'm wondering what you're doing, as you put it, not just through your words, but through your vote as well, to help alleviate this issue. Thank you.
Well, I mean, the questions are appropriately related. There's a false debate being had every time we suffer a tragedy like this about whether it's mental health or gun laws, and of course, I mean, it's both. It's both. Every country suffers from mental health challenges, but ours is the only country that is quite literally off the chart in per capita gun deaths every single year. It's no mystery. I mean, we have the natural experiments. Lax gun laws lead to gun deaths. Thankfully, Massachusetts has strong gun laws, including an assault weapons ban and background checks and red flag laws. Those are under challenge. I would encourage everyone here to get involved in the 2026 referendum here at the state level to uphold Massachusetts' recently passed gun laws, because there's a group trying to overturn them. At the federal level, folks, I wish I had good news to report, and I don't. This president is basically unilaterally gutting the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Bureau, as well as all of the gun enforcement agencies within the FBI and other federal branches. I'm doing all the things at the congressional level to fight back, but it's very bad. I'll give you one example. We know that ghost guns are a real problem. Ghost guns are the ability to manufacture weapons from non-serialized pieces at home. So you buy a receiver, you buy a barrel, you buy a trigger, and you put it together at your house. No serialized gear and no metal, so it can bypass a metal detector. Why on earth anybody thinks that's a good idea is just totally beyond me, and Massachusetts very thoughtfully has said you can't do that. You cannot assemble a ghost gun at your house. At the federal level, they're trying to make it easier. They're trying to make it easier to get Glock switches. Glock switches are a device, very cheap, that you can insert into a pistol that allows it to fire in an automatic fashion. Very, very commonly used in gang violence throughout our cities. These are things that have no utility whatsoever for any legal purpose for firearms, but they're being opened up for wider use. And so I'm fighting back politically. My leadership PAC that I raised for is called Beyond Thoughts and Prayers, because I'm sick of hearing Republicans talk about thoughts and prayers. And so we are surging financial and organizing resources to the battleground districts, because we do in fact have to put gun violence on the ballot and make people pay for their votes against it. Of course, we also have to address mental health. I've been on my soapbox about social media. I won't go back on there again, but I do think it is a key drive in the decline in mental health for our young people. But we also have to be more proactive in delivering better primary care on the behavioral health care front. Massachusetts is doing good work there with the community behavioral health centers. We've got to try to protect that funding despite the Medicaid cuts. And then, as the woman said, this is a state level law, but I'll dip my toe in it. I do agree that particularly for patients with schizophrenia, they may have anosognosia, meaning they may not know that they are ill and thereby decline to take their medications. And in those situations, it is appropriate for a medical professional and for a judge to declare that they are required to receive treatment, because they can become a threat to themselves or others. Sort of like a red flag law, but for significant mental health issues.
Paul Birds from Rentham. I agree with one of the things you said in your opening statement. Without the power, you can't do anything. So we can talk a lot about issues, but you can go back, and if you're constantly beaten down in the House or down in the Senate by votes and everything, you can't do anything. The last presidential election was approximately 155 million votes for the presidential election. And Pew Research did a study on that, and they came out that there's roughly 245 million eligible voters, both registered and non-registered in this country. That's 90 million Americans that did not vote. If you had 25% of that number, you would have had the House and Senate. Okay, so what I'm trying to understand is, in order to get these good issues that people bring up, get something done effectively about it, you need the people, you need the majority in the House and the majority in the Senate. Not by 2 seats, not by 5 seats, but more, so you can make it kind of feel safe. I'm trying to find out, after voting for 55 years, what is going to be done different to try to go after those 90 million voters, and what is going to be done to help put a Democratic candidate on every House seat and every Senate seat that's open for election. I think they're all, the House is totally open this year, isn't it? But yet, as you indicated, and we've seen in state seats, you can see one person on the ballot and that's it. So we really need a lot to be done so that we can get that majority, and what will the Democratic Party do about it?
Good afternoon. I'm Rob Schrager from Franklin. You spoke briefly, very eloquently at the beginning about the reasonable process of moving away from things you're against and focusing on things we're in favor of. My question is, what does recovery look like? With all the problems we've created in the last few years, challenges to international relationships and damage we've done to national programs, these don't feel like the kind of problems that go away if you just stop doing them.
Agreed. So the genius of this country, I've always thought, as a democracy, is not that we always get the right answer. We, of course, don't. It's that we self-correct when we're getting it wrong. That's really what makes democracy so resilient, is the ability for we, the people, to weigh in and recover. And it's why I ultimately am always going to bet on the United States over the Chinese Communist Party, is because we can tap into the common sense and decency of the electorate, and the Politburo cannot, and they're going to go off course because of it. So what recovery looks like to me is empowering the exhausted majority in this country. 2/3 of Americans are not as polarized as social media and cable news would have you believe. I promise you they're not. 2/3 of Americans are huddled between the 40-yard lines on almost all of the issues, including the hot button ones: immigration, abortion, gun safety, national security. We are very tribal, even as we are polarized. We have come to think of the other as the enemy, not just as the opponent. And so I think recovery to me is just self-awareness of this exhausted majority, the ability for people to say, actually, I am swimming with the current of American public opinion, despite the fact that the flanks are so ferocious. But this president, we're never going to be able to achieve that with this president in the Oval Office, because we've seen, even at moments of tragedy, like with Mr. Kirk, he's just unable to rise above and try to draw forth the better angels of our nature. He just won't do it. Everything, of course, is partisan and tribal, but 28 gives us a chance to recover. And towards that end, to the first gentleman's question about what we can do, I am helping to lead an effort called Majority Democrats, and it's 32 of us to start with, some members of Congress, but mostly governors and mayors and state house leaders, to try to help reinvent the Democratic Party over the next 5 years. And I'll tell you, it's a great group of young leaders, and so much of the potential and talent I see is actually with these mayors in blue cities and red states. It's so encouraging to talk to some of these folks. The mayor of Kansas City, of San Antonio, of Cincinnati, of Denver. They're getting stuff done. They're not performative about it. They're workhorses, not show horses. But if we want to build back trust with the American public, we've got to deliver. We've got to govern and deliver and show them that we can be the party of improvement. And that happens, I think, at the state, local level in synergy with federal members. So I'm working on that effort, and I've got high hopes.
Hi, I'm Alice Higgins. I'm from Rentham. So my question is about school safety, and I know you just touched upon this, but it seems as though we're not going to get the gun reform we want and need under this administration, and unfortunately the same seems to be true with the mental health crisis. So what can we do to make our schools safer?
Congressman, thank you very much for coming today, and thank you very much for your service to the country as a military person. My question is really from the opening statement as far as what's happening with our test results for public education. You know, I think it's education in public schools, and I'd like your comments on what you think charter schools have a role in the future. There was a book written a couple years ago by Thomas Sowell and put a lot of information and statistics together. It seems like there's a lot of parents, especially in inner cities, that are looking to get their children enrolled, but there's not enough spaces for that. So I'd like to know, where does charter schools fit into this whole picture, and how could the education system maybe improve by it? Thank you.
I think charter schools can be part of the solution. I'm a federal policymaker. I'm deferential to state and local policymakers on a lot of K-12 education issues, and Massachusetts has decided to cap the number of charter schools in the state. One thing that I think is a proven educational reform that I talked about briefly at the top, though, is whether you're in a charter school or a public school, the ability to get one-on-one tutoring to kids is transformative. We know that one-on-one tutoring for phonics and reading in 1st and 2nd grade, and for mathematics, particularly algebra in 6th and 7th grade, really helps kids get to reading proficiently in 3rd grade and doing algebra by 8th grade. And those two wickets, reading by 3rd grade, algebra by 8th grade, are very, very predictive of high school success and later success. And we've seen states like Mississippi, like Louisiana, candidly, in a lot of ways, put forward better curriculum and pedagogy than we're even seeing here in Massachusetts on some of these fronts. And so we, I think, at the state level, at the federal level, should be supporting these efforts to make all schools, charter and public, you know, get them on the cutting edge of the science of education. And the funding should not be insurmountable. Like I said, I think the Social Media Corporation should pay for all of it. They got plenty of money. They do plenty of tax avoidance. And it's time they actually gave something back to all the kids that they treat like products. But even without that, this governor, to her great credit, is surging to, I think, 10,000 students in Massachusetts over the next year, one-on-one tutoring for reading. So Governor Healy's leading on this issue already. For school safety, you know, we talked about the guns. It's the #1 thing. Vice President J.D. Vance has said that school shootings are, quote, a fact of life. I don't agree. They're a fact of policy. Other countries don't suffer from this. We do. The answer is not to turn our schools into fortresses. The answer is not to arm our teachers. The answer is not to double down on active shooter drills that I think in a lot of ways do more harm than good to the mental health of our children, particularly young children. The answer is to get rid of the darn guns. Background checks and red flag laws and assault weapons bans. In President Biden's administration, after the massacre at Uvalde, Congress passed a bipartisan gun safety bill, which I was proud to vote for, that made it much more challenging for 18 to 21-year-olds to buy weapons without a background check. That bill has already saved lives. It has already saved lives. We are already seeing 18 to 21-year-olds who have been flagged for criminal background and who on further review clearly had criminal intent when they tried to purchase that weapon. And we need much stronger versions of those laws. You know, as you said, though, it ain't happening over the next 2 years with this president. So we're going to have state action, and it starts with protecting the gains that Massachusetts has made on that ballot initiative in 2026.
Jake, thanks for coming out. I'm Tom Brady from Mansfield. You know, in the aftermath of what went down in Utah a couple of days ago, the public official who's most impressed me is a guy that, you know, I would tell you, I probably have nothing in common with, but Spencer Fox.
Spencer Cox, yeah.
Spencer Fox,
Yeah.
the governor of Utah. I mean, I could tell you that I probably have nothing in common with a Republican governor from Utah. But the thoughts he's expressed and the way he's carried himself have impressed me very much. And it leads me to think that there's just got to be more opportunity for people like you, your talent, and others to reach across and embrace these folks and talk to them. Now, you talked about the folks that, the 80% of the Republicans that you'd go to dinner with. That's fine. I buy it. A little bit of a cop-out, frankly, because I can't fathom that folks aren't finding a way to talk and communicate and to agree and reason with each other. And it just must be worse than I can ever imagine it is in Washington these days. So I just encourage you to keep trying, and keep those lines of communication open, because we need more Spencer Foxes, and I can't believe I'm saying that. All right.
Hi, Congressman. Thank you for taking our questions. My name is Elizabeth Zucker from Norfolk, Massachusetts. And my question for you is, over the past year, I've become very involved with a number of different local groups, and I've met some tremendous people. And we've been trying to do a lot locally to get others engaged and aware and participatory in what is happening in our country right now. And I gotta tell you, out here in the wild, it feels like we're in free fall. And my question, and a lot of people that we talk to are either afraid to become involved, or they don't feel like it's gonna do any good. So my question for you is, A, tell me again why we're not in free fall, because it feels that way. And B, what can we offer? What would your suggestions be to folks to help them feel confident that this is in fact achievable, winning back the House, winning back the Senate, because all of these subjects that have been raised today are fantastic. But if our democracy doesn't survive to the next election, then what? And how do we prevent that from happening?
So I've addressed a few elements of that question. One is my work with majority Democrats to help reinvent the party so we can win. One is the importance of federalism, of state and local actions. And keep this in mind, please, everybody, when, sometime in the future, a president and a Congress that you agree with wants to do sweeping things, remember what it feels like when it's the other side and they want to do sweeping things. Our founding fathers were very, very wise with the 10th Amendment and with their separation of powers to slow things down and give a lot of feedback loops with state and local leadership. But at the core of it, we're only in free fall if we decide that we are, because ultimately this president's policies are not popular. He doesn't actually, despite his many, many gratuitous claims, does not have a mandate. He doesn't have a mandate for the tariffs, they're not popular. He doesn't have a mandate to cut Medicaid, it's not popular. He does not have a mandate, even though his positions on immigration may sometimes get majority support. He does not have a mandate for violating posse comitatus and deploying military troops to American cities. It's not popular. He does not have a mandate to rip up our alliances and lay ourselves prostrate in front of China and Russia. These things are not popular, and ultimately the American public, reawakened and energized, does not have to be in free fall. And we have seen over and over again that when disparate elements of civil society push back, whether it's biomedical funding, whether it's immigration raids, his administration pulls back. They are sensitive to public pressure, and we have to keep it up. And some of the elements that can be part of that public pressure are people like Spencer Cox. The gentleman over here raised Spencer Cox, the governor of Utah, as someone he was impressed by. I've gotten to know Governor Cox over the last several weeks. He and I met at the National Conference of State Legislatures here in Boston. And he is a man of moral conviction and integrity. And we're very aligned in particular on social media. And I think where he's been very effective in the last several days is helping the American public see how much social media is platforming the hate that is then spiraling out of control. And I hope he continues on that thread.
Thank you. So first, I'd like to say thank you for your service. And when we look at companies like United Healthcare and many other in the space, we see companies that are for-profit that are doing the most amount as possible to make sure that they don't have to give money to the people who've paid them in times in need. So what do you think you should do about, what have you done and what do you think should be done about that issue?
You, sir.
Good afternoon, Mr. Auchincloss. My name is Harper. I'm from Needham. Earlier this meeting, you talked about social media and the internet, and I wanted to connect that to the question from 2 days ago. There is a section of the Communications Decency Act known as Section 230, where internet websites cannot be held responsible for user-generated content. I understand that a lot of harm has been, I don't want to say enabled, but you get the point. But let's consider the alternative. If it is repealed or weakened, what is to stop Mr. Trump or any far-right president who may follow him from using it to crack down on internet speech and effectively remove a key barrier to totalitarian control of the narrative? What I'm asking is, what are you willing to do to prevent such an outcome?
I appreciate the question. So the gentleman just asked about repealing Section 230 of the Telecommunications Decency Act and whether that might empower political censorship. You may have been here at the beginning when I talked briefly about Section 230. So Section 230, for everybody's awareness, again, is the 1990s bill that immunizes, it holds harmless social media corporations and websites in general from user-generated content that is libelous or slanderous or otherwise objectionable. They can't be sued for it. It's a fair question. I appreciate the question. The bipartisan legislation that I led last Congress to reform Section 230, what it did is it only removed a liability shield for conduct online that is already considered a tort in the real world. So in the real world, you can't libel somebody or slander somebody, and we've got 1,000 years of jurisprudence to tell us what that means. In the real world, you can't non-consensually take an image of somebody and broadcast it for other people to see. And what my bill did is say, for things that in the real world are torts or illegal, if they're platformed by these social media corporations, and these social media corporations are doing nothing about it, it's their problem too. What my bill did not do is say anything about political speech. Anything within the broad remit of the First Amendment, criticizing the president, criticizing me, criticizing other countries, any kind of First Amendment speech, none of that is subject to review or take down policies by these corporations. Because we do. Americans have a very, very wide latitude and tolerance for speech, as we should. I think it's a good thing, and we want to protect that online. And we don't want to empower bad faith attorneys general to take down content that they themselves don't like. And then the young man asked about United Healthcare and for-profit insurance companies. There's a whole lot to dig into there. Let me put it 2 points about how we can hold these for-profit health insurance corporations accountable. One is what's called upcoding. United Health built their empire off upcoding. What it is in Medicare Advantage, some of you may be on United Healthcare through Medicare Advantage, United Healthcare says to the federal government that their patient population is much more sick than they actually are. And so they get more money from the federal government to treat a population that's way sicker, or that they claim is way sicker than it actually is. That's a practice called upcoding. They induce physicians to plug into the reimbursement system way more conditions than that individual actually has, even if they're spurious conditions. United Healthcare is under both criminal and civil investigations for this practice. Both administrations, Biden and Trump, have been going after. Now you're seeing United Healthcare has doubled its lobbying spend in the last 3 months. I think they're spending $9 million a quarter on lobbying, hiring all of Trump's former lawyers. You can't make this stuff up. They're literally hiring the president's former attorneys to lobby for them. And I think we should all be concerned that we're going to magically see some of these investigations go away. Well, I'm on the Committee of Jurisdiction for Medicare Advantage. You have my absolute assurance that I'm not forgetting about these investigations. I'm going to be keeping my foot on the gas for both regulatory action against upcoding and also legislation that would ban it fully and hold this company to account. On the other front, United Healthcare owns lots of stuff, but one of the things it owns is a pharmacy benefit manager. I talked about these briefly. That's the drug pricing middlemen. Pharmacy benefit managers are sort of the service providers that on one hand negotiate with drug makers, on the other hand negotiate with pharmacies. They're in the middle, and they don't make any drugs, they don't distribute any drugs, they don't dispense any drugs. They're just kind of pushing the paper back and forth. Somehow they've managed to make like $500 billion a year doing that. I'm the co-lead of legislation that would, bipartisan, that would significantly curtail that. We got very, very close in December to passing it. And then, again in the category of you can't make this up, Elon Musk tweeted about it, and the speaker pulled it from the House floor 6 hours later. I'm not joking, that happened. We got to bring it back to the House floor. We got to pass this thing. It's not a silver bullet, but we're gonna, United Healthcare built its empire over the course of 50 years. It's going to take us a few years to right-size it.
Congressman, before we get to the final 4 questions here, I just want to let everybody know that we have about 10 minutes left, so we're going to sort of speed round these last 4 questions. I know you want to stay here all day, Congressman, but we have to get you back home to the kids. So with that, we will continue. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Congressman, for being here. I think you're very interested in toxins. Am I correct?
Yes.
I have two issues with toxins. First of all, my sister is seriously ill, and I know you're also a Marine Corps officer, veteran, and also in the reserves. She was a Navy nurse at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, back in 1970 to 72, and she has very serious health problems resulting from that tour of duty. And I'm also concerned about PFAS chemicals. I have a very good friend. He and his wife adopted a child who was born at Pease Air Force Base up in New Hampshire and has been affected, like a lot of kids have, with PFAS chemicals. Now, I think as far as the Camp Lejeune suit is concerned, it appears that the Navy Department is slowing things down and creating barriers where diseases that have come forth after the August 2024 cutoff of filing a suit are not considered.
So let me just, we can definitely follow up for casework, and I will address the broader question too about toxins, both military and PFAS.
Right. Hi. Housing and its scarcity is a great concern, and you've suggested that we need to build more housing, which I agree would help, but what sort of policy would you implement to ensure that corporate developers, like one of your top donors of Blackstone, don't monopolize housing, which would increase the cost of housing in the long term? And with that, of course, we know that privatized housing will never meet needs, as it would require a level of scarcity to ensure that they are profitable to start building in the first place.
Let's do all 4, and I'll answer all 4. Okay.
Hello, I have a question about the Epstein files. I believe the Epstein files are President Trump Watergate, because we know what happened in Watergate with Nixon and what we was hiding. So I would like to know is, why aren't they releasing the Watergate files? And because we know that Trump is more involved with Epstein than we know, and he's really in really deep. So why can't we impeach him and get those files open?
Hello, Congressman. Thank you for being here to talk to us. My name is Pegine Dos Santos from Milford, Massachusetts. We're in crisis, constitutional crisis, in fear of losing our democracy. Something you said today is the first thing that's given me any hope in a long time, and that's the work you're doing to reform the Democratic Party. I'm going to go to your website. I'm going to find out how I can help with that. With that in mind, do you have any thoughts, pros and cons, about potential changes in leadership at the top in the Democratic Party, in the Senate, in the House, in the party, to help us bring a unified message for Democrats so that we can have hope that we can potentially win back some of these seats so that we can have a place going forward? Thank you.
Hello, thanks for taking my question. I'll make it quick. I am concerned about the 2026 midterms. I'm wondering if you're also concerned about whether there'll be any tampering with the election results. If you're not concerned, I'd like to know why. If you are concerned, I'm wondering if there's a plan in place to make sure that the elections are fair.
I appreciate the question, ma'am. All right, let me go through these. On 2026 midterms, yes, I think I would be complacent if I were not on guard. We're dealing with somebody who literally tried to steal an election in 2020, including using force. And then, of course, with the mid-district gerrymandering in Texas and Indiana and Missouri, we're seeing just the lengths to which he will go to try to deprive voters of a free and fair voice to weigh in on his policies. So, I mean, one, Democrats have to hit back. It's not the kind of redistricting policy I think ideally our country would have. I want to have independent redistricting commissions, but I'm not bringing a pencil to a knife fight. California needs to hit back hard if Texas is going to do this and demonstrate that we are going to be in this fight for the 26 midterms. We also have to be on guard for state and local integrity of the tabulation. Another example of why federalism is such a good idea: we don't have national elections, right? We have state and local elections. That's a very important bulwark against a would-be dictator, something we should not change. And there's a group called Protect Democracy. It's here in Massachusetts, actually, founded and headquartered. And they do work countrywide to make more resilient the unglamorous and yet critically important work of state and local county election clerks. They also help defend them against litigation. And so if you're interested in helping to make our elections more resilient, please get involved with Protect Democracy. They're terrific. They helped, for example, the Georgia clerk in 2020, the Arizona clerks in 2020, helped defend them against some really awful doxing and litigation. The Epstein files, I've co-signed the discharge petition, which basically is a way to try to force this issue to a vote in the House. We need a couple more Republicans to get onto it, and then we can vote for disclosure. Obviously, the president finds this embarrassing, so he doesn't want to do it, and Republicans are supplicating themselves to the president. One thing I would just leave in everyone's head, though, is not so much do you think the president is implicated in the Epstein files. I think it's pretty clear that he is. It's if he were. Imagine like just the worst thing came out. If he were, do you think it would change any of these Republicans in Congress' ability to just rubber stamp him anyway? That's the thing to reflect on. It's not what might be true. I think we all have a sense in our head of what probably is true. It's the fact that even if it came out, these people that I work with across the aisle, who, as I said, are themselves, normal people mostly, they're so afraid that they would continue to just rubber stamp his every worst impulse and action. And if that's not a mandate to throw these people out of office, I don't know what else is. And that's the case we have to make to the American public. On housing, the best way to reduce, in any market, competition is what lowers prices. At any market, competition is what lowers prices. We have inhibited competition because of zoning and land use laws across the country. We need about 5 million more units of housing across the country, and a really important way to do that, I won't go into all the federal legislation, all the state legislation, but we've got to build more housing near transit. We got to make accessory dwelling units easier. We got to make that missing middle housing easier to construct. That is competition for those big developers. It also is housing for the middle class and the working class. And I want to compliment Massachusetts State House, Jeff Roy and others, for their leadership on the MBTA Communities Act and other pieces of legislation that start that process. We got more work to do. And then, leadership for Democrats, House, Senate, and otherwise. I think we need to, my profession is not well known for our ability to retire gracefully, I think it's fair to say. And I think a lot of politicians should take their cue from what I saw as a new member, which was Nancy Pelosi, who had power, and she handed it off. And she said, let me tell you why it's my time. And I thought that was an example that many others should follow. But more than leaders also, as I hope has come forward today, Democrats need ideas. We need new and bold, refreshing and relevant ideas for Americans to campaign on. I hope to be part of that effort. Thank you for your time this afternoon.
Thank you, Congressman Auchincloss. The congressman is heading out, but please know as you exit the auditorium, our staff is available. We have little question forms in case you had a question or a comment that did not get answered. And I will stay here at the front of the auditorium to answer any questions. But thank you all for spending your Sunday afternoon with us. We are grateful. The congressman heard a lot of really thoughtful questions, and please reach out to our office anytime. Thank you.